Greetings from Mission Control Houston and welcome to Space Station Live. It's a fairly busy week for the astronauts on board the International Space Station. Quite a bit of research and maintenance work being conducted as they move throughout the week. Pavel Vinogradov, current commander of Expedition 36, has quite a few tasks on his schedule. He'll be studying cardiac bioelectric activity of his own body while at rest. This one of the many biological experiments that these astronauts do as expedition crew members on board the International Space Station, serving as guinea pigs themselves for many of these experiments. Throughout the week, Vinogradov has also been involved in a lot of maintenance activities throughout the Russian segment, cleaning out many of the ventilation systems and taking photographs. We'll also be replacing quite a few of the fan screens inside of this ventilation system, and also doing some inspection and photography of the windows inside of the Zvezda service module. He'll be sending these photos down to the ground to Russian controllers in Koryov, just outside of Moscow, as they continue to take a look at the windows, just always checking for any possible imperfections or damage from potential micrometeoroids. He'll also be doing some more work inside of the Russian segment, replacing some directional airflow sensors. Second Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin doing a few biological studies himself, starting off mornings with the Sprott 2 experiment, which looks to observe the liquid components of a crew member's body, such as the cellular liquids and blood flow, while in this microgravity environment of space. His task list is also loaded throughout the week with a lot of experiment work, beginning to set up the Molniya Gamma experiment, which will look at gamma radiation splashes and optical radiation during terrestrial lightning and thunderstorm conditions, using 3 sensors. This is an external payload attached to the outboard section of the Russian segment on board the International Space Station. He'll also be taking a few measurements from the Russian Matryoshka experiment. This is a upper torso mannequin-sized doll on board the station with a number of dosimeters placed throughout it that serves as a radiation monitoring device, giving information to teams down on the ground just how much radiation these astronauts are being exposed to during their expedition space flights. He'll also be throughout the week taking some observations for the Russian SINER investigation, which looks at the world's ocean areas on a specific latitude belt, searching for bioproductive water areas for both commercial fishing and biological research studies. He'll also be doing a few maintenance tasks himself on the Russian systems, specifically focusing on the Russian Electron system, which is one of the oxygen-generating devices on board the International Space Station. You can see a picture taken with the previous expedition crew here holding up some of those Electron generators. NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy pretty much focusing his entire week on preparation for some upcoming spacewalks that he'll be undertaking. He'll be stepping outside into the vacuum of space on 2 spacewalks over 2 weeks. Joining him will be ESA astronaut Luca Parmitano, Cassidy designated EV-1, Parmitano EV-2. This will be Cassidy's 5th and 6th spacewalks of his career. He already has 23.5 hours of spacewalking time in 4 previous EVAs, including the unplanned ammonia leak repair that took back on May 11th. Cassidy will be preparing his EMU, or extravehicular mobility unit, the spacesuit that he'll be wearing throughout this spacewalking procedure, checking out the glove heaters and also the battery systems, and doing an on-orbit fit check verification. He'll be joining that fit check verification by Parmitano and fellow NASA astronaut Karen Nyberg. He'll also be going over the procedures in a conference with spacewalk officers down here on the ground in Mission Control Houston. Also doing a software review of what's known as the DUG, the Dynamic Onboard Ubiquitous Graphics System. Aside from all of this EVA preparation throughout the week and over the weekend, Chris Cassidy will also be doing quite a few experimental works. He'll be working with the binary colloidal alloy tests, preparing a few samples for installation in this experiment, also known as BCAT for short. This experiment looks to document the formation of crystals from microscopic spheres known as colloids while they're suspended in a liquid in microgravity. He'll also be conducting his own monthly periodic fitness evaluation, which will be performed on the Cevis, one of the exercise devices on board the International Space Station. Also, Chris Cassidy will be getting in some more time throughout the week on the Spheres experiment, Spheres standing for the Synchronized Positioned Hold, Engage, Reorient Experimental Satellites. They're these small, self-contained, bowling ball-sized objects which are used for a number of different exciting experiments, including formation flying and the development of algorithms by students and teams from schools across the country. They get a chance to follow along with the expedition astronauts, watching as these satellites conduct various flying maneuvers such as rendezvous and docking, and also, again, that formation flying. So Cassidy doing a few Spheres test runs throughout the week. Moving on, our third Russian cosmonaut, Fyodor Yurchikhin, one of the newer members on board the International Space Station. Quite a bit of maintenance work on his task list over the week inside of the Russian segment. He'll be installing 2 adjustable length hoses inside of the Russian gas-liquid mixture filter. Also taking some time to conduct the Russian bar experiment, which looks to develop various methods for detecting depressurization in any of the modules on the Russian segment. He'll be working that in tandem with controllers down on the ground, which will be simulating a number of different test runs for him. We'll also have some standard software loading activities on some of the Russian laptops, just doing a few updates to some of their controlling systems. Also getting his hands on some of the experiment work on the Russian segment. He'll be working with the Russian identification experiment. That's an ongoing investigation looking into the various dynamic loads that the International Space Station's Russian segment structure is subjected to during different dynamic operations. Some of these dynamic operations include docking of visiting vehicles, also station reboosts, the physical exercise of the astronauts themselves, and also any extravehicular activity or spacewalks. The Russians having just completed one back in late June, and the U.S. OS crew members getting ready to complete 2 over the next 2 weeks. European astronaut Luca Parmitano joining Cassidy and much of his activities this week as they continue to prepare for those 2 upcoming spacewalks. He'll be doing an on-orbit fit check verification of his own spacesuit along with Cassidy. He'll also be responsible for doing a checkout of their SAFER devices. The SAFER are small nitrogen gas-powered backpacks that the astronauts wear, sort of acting as their life jacket during these spacewalks, aside from the regular contingent of tethers and hand grips that they use to keep attached to the station. The SAFER can serve as a last resort should the astronauts begin to float away free from the station, getting them back to safety. Parmitano also scheduled to do his own monthly periodic fitness evaluation, also on that SEVIS device, and then doing some pretty major maintenance tasks on board the station for their various ECLS, or the environmental regeneration systems. He'll be inside of the European Columbus module, working on removing and replacing the Columbus's water processing assembly number 2, and also replacing some items inside of the waste and hygiene compartment. He'll be replacing some of the piping between the pump separator and the pre-treat and water pump. And then our final Expedition 36 crew member, Karen Nyberg, doing some robotics workstation checkouts over the rest of the week. She'll be responsible for conducting all the robotic operations during Cassidy and Luca Parmitano's spacewalks, controlling the station's Canadarm2, or the robotic arm. She'll be doing a checkout of that display and control panel, also continuing with a lot of giving a hand with all of the spacesuit or the EMU preparations and going over all of the spacewalk procedures. She'll be doing her own review of the space station's robotic arm, or the Remote Manipulator Systems DUG. The DUG, again, standing for Dynamic Onboard Ubiquitous Graphics. She'll be doing that review with spacewalk officers down here on the ground. Aside from that, quite a bit of experiment work for her. Aside from doing some EarthCam setup. The EarthCam is the Earth knowledge acquired by middle school students. She'll be setting that up towards the end of the week and preparing that for middle school students to control and take photos of various locations around the world. She'll also be working inside of the combustion integrated rack, removing and replacing one of the multi-user droplet combustion apparatus fuel reservoirs. These reservoirs are used to contain the liquid fuel used during droplet combustion experiments. The combustion integrated rack, a self-contained rack on board the International Space Station for various combustion experiments, providing a safe environment for all of the igniting.